Hi, I'm Tash. Welcome to Tash's Library. Today's video is going to be my March wrap-up. A little bit late, but better late than never. So March was an interesting month. I read 10 books all up, which was a little bit lower than my other months. And for the first time in a number of months, I did not finish my actual TBR. Now, the reason for this is because I ended up picking up other books, and I don't know, the two books I didn't read, I really wanted to read, and somehow I didn't get to them. So the first one was Weaponized by Neil Asher, and this one was for the prompt no, the, a, an, off, or and yeah, it's meant to be a really cool sci-fi that I was really looking forward to, and I just didn't get around to it somehow. The other book I didn't read was for the prompt light cover, and this was The Library at Mount Char by Scott Hawkins. And once again, I don't know why I didn't get to this. I just didn't, and I'm a little bit disappointed because I've heard such amazing things about this book. All right, so having a look at the 10 books that I have read, I'm going to go through them in order from my least favorite to my most favorite book. So let's get started. Number 10 was a romance novel, which I listened to on audio. And this is Take a Hint, Danny Brown by Talia Hibbert. Yes, I know I didn't like the first book in this particular Brown Sisters series, but I thought I'd give this one a go anyway, and I actually enjoyed it more than the first one, which was Get a Life, Chloe Brown. And I ended up giving this 3 stars. Now, this book was not part of my TBR. It didn't fulfill any prompts. I just had it on audio and I needed to listen to something while I was driving, and so I decided to start this one. Now, this is, as I said, the second in the Brown Sisters series, and they very, very loosely connected. The only real connection between these books is that the protagonists in each novel are sisters. Yes, and there are some references to previous romances in the other books. So, in this one, Danny is a PhD student who agrees to fake date the security guard in her building. And of course, all sorts of shenanigans ensue. So yes, it is a fake dating trope. Now, what I didn't like about this were the very, very cringy similes and metaphors, and some of the descriptions were ooh. Like I was driving and I'm like, oh, did I just hear that? And maybe it's better if you read it, but there's something about having it said to you which was just very confronting. And I actually found some of the supposed sexy moments were really very unsexy. Anyway, what I did like about this one, however, was its very engaging narrator. The narrator's faultless. I absolutely love the way she does everyone's voices. It also represented mental health really well. So one of the characters in this suffers from anxiety, and I thought it was done superbly well and really represented what anxiety feels like. The love interest is a very likable character as well, and there were a number of very likable supporting characters, and the character development throughout the book was very, very believable. So who would I recommend this for? Well, any lovers of lighthearted romance, lovers of the fake dating trope, and those looking for mental health representation in romance novels. Number 9 was Law Olympus, Volume 1. And this I gave 3 stars to as well. This was not part of a prompt at all, but just a book I happened to receive for Christmas, and I wanted to get to it, and it was just a really easy read. So this is a graphic novel that tells a love story between Hades and Persephone in a very modernized form. What I didn't like about this was that I found some of the characters difficult to distinguish, and that's more on me because I'm not very good at distinguishing features. So I'm probably not the person for graphic novels. It also reads quite young, but the themes are very adult. So it was interesting because it features all sorts of things. It's got all sorts of trigger warnings, things like assault, etc. And so I felt like the reading young didn't kind of vibe with the adult themes. But what I really loved about this book is the gorgeous art. The palette is beautiful. It's just all these beautiful pinks, purples, and that. It's a very cool retelling of a well-known Greek myth, and it explores themes of identity and parental expectations and the desire for independence so well. So I would recommend this for those looking for a different take on a well-known Greek myth. So coming in at number 8 was for my prompt text and patterns, and this is The Goblin Emperor by Catherine Addison. So this is a fantasy novel that I read on ebook, and I ended up giving it 3 stars. It follows Maya, a goblin and 4th son to the emperor, and when a tragic accident kills his father and 3 brothers, he finds himself inheriting the throne and taking on a role that he had never really imagined for himself. And he needs to navigate the political intrigue of the court and work out who he can trust, work out how to rule a country. And that was very interesting. Now, what I didn't like about this is it's a very slow burn. It is a very slice of life, court politics, and you have hundreds of pages where nothing happens except conversations. A lot of the characters as well had very similar names, and there are a lot of characters. So I found it very hard to follow at times, and there were still characters I couldn't distinguish. And I probably, you need to put in quite a bit of work to follow who's who. Now, what I did like about this, however, is that Maya is a very, very likable character. I really liked following his experiences. There were also some great supporting characters and a really cool underlying mystery as well. And the plot became increasingly engaging towards the end. Also, it explored some great themes of the attributes of leadership and duty. So I would recommend this for lovers of political intrigue and court politics, and readers who enjoy detailed characterization and slice of life. Number 7 was for my prompt ebook, and this was The Keiju Preservation Society by John Scalzi. This is a science fiction novel that follows Jamie, who is working as a delivery driver for food delivery apps after losing his job during the COVID-19 epidemic. And he then receives a great job offer to work for a secretive animal organization, which brings him into this alternative world with very, very unusual fauna and flora. I ended up giving this 4 stars. What I didn't like about it is the climax. I didn't enjoy the climax, and some of the characters are really not very well developed. This is very much a plot-driven book. What I did like, though, was it was lighthearted. It was such a fun read, had fascinating world building that bends known biological laws, which I found really interesting. And it had some really cool references to other science fiction texts, pop culture, which I really, really enjoyed. So I would recommend this for lovers of books like Jurassic Park and books with similar premises, and also those looking for a little bit of humor in their sci-fi. Number 6 was not on my official TBR game, but it did fulfill the buzzword reading challenge, which required you to read a novel that had the word secret in the title. So for this, I read The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandana. And this is a fantasy book that follows a lonely witch who's hired to teach magic to 3 young witches in this isolated manor. I ended up giving this 4 stars. And what I didn't like about it was it had very irrational adults who made very poor decisions. And this is not one of those cases where you have young characters acting young. You're talking about quite mature characters who are acting very young and very stupid. But what I did like about this was the great characterization of some of the characters. It was very cozy and sweet. It had found family tropes, and it explored themes of identity, acceptance of difference, family, and belonging. So I would highly recommend this for any lovers of cozy fantasy, those looking for a sweet and hopeful book about found family, and those who enjoyed books like The House in the Cerulean Sea. Number 5 was for the prompt winter, and I ended up choosing 6 Crimson Cranes by Elizabeth Lim. And this is a fantasy YA novel that follows Shiori, and her brothers are cursed to turn into cranes during daylight hours. She is exiled from her home and cursed to have one of her brothers die for every word that she utters, which is a pretty awful position to be in. So she has to find this way to break the curses and save her brothers. I gave this 4 stars. What I didn't like about it was that some things weren't very adequately explained in my opinion, and there was a very abrupt cliffhanger. Now this is obviously not an issue because there is a sequel. However, I kind of like my series to have some kind of resolution in each book, so that if you have a gap between books, you still feel vaguely satisfied. What I loved about this, however, was the writing style. It was very lyrical and engaging. It had awesome integration of mythology, great character development, and explored themes of family and gender expectations. So I would recommend this for any lovers of retellings and fairy tales, and anyone in a reading slump, because I picked this up when I was feeling a little slumpy, and this got me back in. I really enjoyed this. I flew through this really, really quickly. Number 4 was for the prompt loved author, and this was Daughter of the Empire by Raymond E. Feist and Janie Wirtz. So this is the first book in the Empire trilogy, and it's a fantasy novel that follows Mara, who's a 17-year-old who decides to go into a religious life, but then her father and brother are killed in battle, and she finds herself head of her house and having to face political intrigue and assassination attempts in a world that views women as wives and mothers. I gave this 4 stars, and what I didn't like about it was there wasn't much character development. And of course, I am a character-driven reader, and there's very little meaningful interaction between characters, I found. Now, this is also something I found in the Magician trilogy, like the first books by Feist. Yeah, it's more plot-driven. But what I did love about this book is that Mara is a kick-ass strong female character who easily holds her own in a world of men. There is this great underlying sense of peril throughout the novel, which I really enjoyed. The world building is incredible. There's a great exploration of culture, and it explores themes of loyalty and duty and cultural mores. So I would highly recommend this for any lovers of high fantasy and political intrigue, those who enjoyed Magician, and those seeking a strong female protagonist. Number 3, I read on ebook, and this was for the prompt published in 2021. And this is Illborn, which is the first book in the Illborn saga by Daniel T. Jackson. It is a epic fantasy set in a medieval-like setting where 4 different characters begin to develop supernatural powers. Now, I gave this 5 stars. It was an incredible read. And if I had to say something I didn't like about it, is it does become quite brutal in parts, but I enjoyed that anyway. What I loved about this, however, were the different POVs, were such nuanced characters whose motivations were so clear, and you loved some of them. Some of them you're like, oh, I don't know if I like you at all. But you can all, even when you don't like what they do, and even when you don't really like them as a person, you still understand why they act the way they do, which I found amazing. Very intriguing and captivating plots, yet predominantly character driven, which I really enjoy. The world building was intricate, and the book explored themes of piety, prejudice, religious persecution, had great pacing, and I flew through this despite the length, like 700 pages or something, and I've read it so quickly. So I would recommend this for any lovers of epic fantasy. Give this one a go. This is awesome. Number 2 was for the prompt dark cover, and so I picked Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. So this is a science fiction book which follows Jason, a physics professor who is abducted and wakes up in a world that's not quite right. He's not married to his wife, his son was never born, and he's now a celebrated physicist instead of a physics professor. So can he find his way home? Now, I gave this 5 stars. I absolutely loved this book. And if I was hard pressed to find a flaw in it, it's that some people may find some of the concepts a bit trippy. Like it's very scientific, and sometimes I had to just stop and go, whoa, let me get my head around what's actually going on. But yes, I found that amazing. What I loved about this is those deep scientific ideas that were explored. The premise was fascinating, and I often found myself actually thinking what I would do if I were in the same situation as some of these characters. The characters were very likable. I really cared what happened to them. And overall, it was a very engaging and unput-downable book. And I would recommend this for anyone who enjoys fast-paced, plot-driven books, and also for any lovers of thrillers who are wanting to get into sci-fi, because this really is a sci-fi thriller. And number 1 was not on my TBR at all. And it is a science fiction book that I gave 5 stars to, and it's probably one of the best books I have read all year. It is Empire of Silence by Christopher Ruocchio. So this is the first in the Sun Killer series. So this follows Hadrian Marlowe, who recounts his story of how he becomes a renowned hero and murderer of billions after he kills a son. So it's quite reminiscent of Name of the Wind. Now, for those who don't like Name of the Wind, I wouldn't worry, because it doesn't read like that at all in terms of even the prose and the characterization and everything. It's completely different. But the premise of having that main character tell his story is very similar. What I didn't like about this? Absolutely nothing. There is nothing I didn't like about this book. It is awesome. I loved the prose. It was so beautifully written, highly engaging. The characterization and world building, in my opinion, were flawless. The plot was so unpredictable. I really didn't know what was going to happen. And every time something happened, I was like, oh, I did not see that coming. And I just didn't know. I was just on the edge of my seat all the time. And I love that idea that it's a space opera, but it's also an epic fantasy. And it's pretty much the best of both coming together. It's almost Star Wars in nature. It's got that underlying science fiction world, but then it's epic fantasy in the way the story develops and is told. It also explores awesome themes of class, survival, heresy, religious persecution, prejudice, and nobility. And I would recommend this for any lovers of fantasy who are wanting to branch into sci-fi, because it does really straddle the two. Any lovers of rich world building and nuanced characters. This is awesome. If you haven't read it, please read it, because it is one of the most underrated books at the moment. And that's that. that's my March wrap up. So thank you for watching. Thank you if you've subscribed. If you haven't and you think you might want to, please do so. Makes me very, very happy. And until I see you next time, take care.